welcome everyone to the Psychological Humanities and Ethics lecture at the Lynch School of Education and Human Development here at Boston College. We hope that this space can be a home for ethically rich conversations that are taking place across the intersection of various disciplines. And we're really delighted to have you here with us tonight. My name is Justin Carter. I'm a psychologist working in affiliation with the Center for Psychological Humanities here at BC. And I'm really excited to welcome you to tonight's offering titled The Fascist Turn, Race and Gender in Totalitarian Regimes. So first, I'll go ahead and introduce some of our presenters here. Dr. Sue Grand is faculty at the NYU postdoctoral program in psychoanalysis, faculty at the Mitchell Center for Relational Psychoanalysis, faculty at the National Institute for the Psychotherapies, visiting scholar at the Psychoanalytic Association of Northern California, and a visiting scholar at the Chicago Center for Psychoanalysis. She's on the editorial boards of Psychoanalytic Dialogues and Psychoanalysis, Culture, and Society, and is the author of The Reproduction of Evil, A Clinical and Cultural Perspective, and The Hero in the Mirror, From Fear to Fortitude. She's also co-author of the upcoming book, Transgenerational Transmission, A Contemporary Introduction. She practices in Teaneck, New Jersey, and New York City. Welcome, Dr. Grand. Also, our second presenter tonight is Dr. Komal Choksi. Unfortunately, she is unable to be with us tonight, but we have the luck of having Dr. Katie Jeunesse reading her paper on her behalf. So I'm going to introduce both of them now. So Dr. Komal Choksi is a clinical psychologist in full-time private practice in New York City, and also an analytic candidate at NYU postdoctoral program in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. She is a contributing author to the book Freud Along the Ganges, Psychoanalytic Reflections on the People and Culture of India, which was a recipient of the Gradiva Award. Her clinical and writing interests lie in psychoanalytic and socio-historical perspectives on personal and collective trauma, gender, and coloniality. And Dr. Katie Jeunesse received her doctorate from the Department of Human Development at the University of Chicago and completed analytic training at the NYU postdoctoral program in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. She is honored to teach candidates at NYU Postdoc, the National Psychological Association for Psychoanalysis, and the Manhattan Institute for Psychoanalysis. So thank you for being here tonight, Katie and Sue. A note to our viewers tonight that as questions arise from the dialogue, please feel free to enter them into the Zoom Q&A feature throughout the course of the presentation. If you have a question that comes to mind, throw it in there. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll read out some of those questions to our panelists who will then facilitate discussion about that question. Also, if you're here for CE credits, our professional and continuing ed team will be here and posting comments throughout the presentation to direct you on what you need to do to complete your CEs. The format tonight, Dr. Grand will begin. I'll be handing it off shortly. She'll play a video for us and set some context for the talk. Then Katie Jeunesse will read Komal Choksi's presentation, and then Sue Grand will read hers, and then we'll move to discussion. So thank you all for being here. And at this point, I'll pass it off to you. Dr. Grand, thank you.
Hi, so welcome everybody. I know it's a scary time for us all. And so we're about to watch a scary video. This video is the American Bunt Association, 1939, meeting at Madison Square Garden. And a part of the context of this is that we don't know if Trump's father, Fred Trump, was actually there. We do know that he had fascist sympathies. We do know that he was arrested at a KKK rally in 1927. So it's like, and we do know that he lived in Queens. So it's likely that he was at this rally. You'll also see a protester attempting to stop the speaker from speaking, and you'll see what happens. Okay, Allie, you can play the video.
pledge undivided allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Americans, American patriots, I'm sure I do not come before you tonight as a complete stranger. You all have heard of me through the Jewish-controlled press as a creature with horns, a cloven hoof, and a long tail. We, with American ideals, demand that our government shall be returned to the American people who founded it.
If you ask what we are actively fighting for under our charter, first, a social just white Gentile who rules the United States. Second, Gentile-controlled labor union, free from Jewish Moscow-directed domination.
I just want to say you can see there the merging of, so the figure of George Washington and the swastikas and the merging of American patriotism with fascism, which is what we're afraid will happen in 2024 if Trump is elected. So, Katie, want to go ahead?
Of course, of course. Thank you, of course, for having me. I'm honored to be reading my colleague's paper and hope to do it justice. So this contribution is entitled The Seed and the Bullet, The Sanctity of Life and Deadly Fragile White Masculinities. Two ways in which I believe the tilt toward the totalitarian can be seen in the US is one, in the demonization and criminalization of the maternal subject, and in the pursuit of sadistic, omnipotent control through the desire to control the reproductive body and female anatomy. And two, the desire for free and unregulated access to weapons of destruction. Since the inception of the nation, the United States has a long history of oppressive, dehumanizing interference in human reproduction on the one hand, and repressive terroristic control through gun violence on the other, as two brutal methods utilized to further the generation of wealth and capital, racial subjugation, and white supremacy. Examples of the former are forced reproduction through reproductive slavery by means of systemic rape and slave breeding, including forced incestuous relationships, castration, forced hysterectomies, and racialized eugenics, as enforced by white slave owners and/or white physicians on Black individuals through the antebellum and Jim Crow eras. This has persisted, for example, through mass forced sterilizations of women in immigration detention camps in recent history. The debates around reproductive rights are dominated by the hypocritical rhetoric of sanctity of life and right to life by those aligned with the anti-choice, so-called pro-life ideology. While signing Alabama's anti-abortion law, the questionably named Human Life Protection Act, the governor cited the belief that every life is precious and that every life is a sacred gift from God. Notably, the states passing the most stringent anti-abortion legislation have the highest infant mortality rates, such as Alabama and Georgia. Overall, the US has incomparably high infant mortality and maternal mortality rates, the highest in the developed world. By far more infants and mothers die in premature deaths in the US than in any other Western nation, with rising rates since 2000, due to inadequate provision of maternal and neonatal care, a refusal to expand Medicaid, amongst a host of other legislative failures to protect maternal and infant life. The state of Alabama also has some of the most lenient gun laws in the country and one of the highest gun death rates. Nationwide, the states most restrictive on abortion access are the least restrictive with gun access. One study in 2019 found that while Missouri had a single abortion clinic, gun purchase was possible at nearly 2,000 stores across the state. And while an abortion required 72 hours of waiting, including counseling by law, a gun sale was able to be completed within 5 minutes. There is also a correlation between strict abortion laws, carceral rates, and execution rates. Returning to Alabama, it incarcerates its population at the highest rate in the country and higher than any democratic nation in the world. In addition, it sentences more individuals to death by capita than any other country in the world. Forced birthing coexists with the strident insistence on unmitigated access to firearms, though gun violence is now the deadliest force in the United States for children, defying the sanctity of life claims of the political right. As of July this year, death by gunshot had overtaken every medical illness and any other accidental injury to account for the greatest number of deaths of children, with over 4,000 child gun deaths in the year 2000. In August, when the Republican-controlled legislature of Indiana banned abortion, starting at conception, some conservative lawmakers objected against the included exceptions for rape and incest. One lawmaker said, "This bill justifies the wicked, those who are murdering babies, and punishes the righteous, the preborn human being, pushing instead for a fetal personhood law with no exceptions." The life interest of the unborn child competes with the liberty interest of the mother, acknowledged one Republican lawmaker. The implication being that women must sacrifice their individual investments in personal freedom to uphold the transcendent fetus. All pregnancy terminations in these states and others are deemed fetal, prenatal, or pre-birth murders of the unborn human being or unborn child, and mothers who abort electively or spontaneously miscarry liable to be prosecuted for homicide. The ingesting of certain legal medications or not undertaking adequate prenatal care are also potential maternal criminal liabilities for jeopardizing the existence of the unborn child. Undergoing a cancer screening could risk being charged with child abuse. Prohibiting choice, surveilling personal health choices, and mandating birth is an attempt to gain justified punitive control over the demonized, lethal maternal figure. There is an identification with the helpless, dependent fetus capable of being annihilated and who must be protected from the fearsome, murdersome mother. The zygote, embryo, and fetus as sacred is enabled, I believe, by its being a representation of male-derived seed, that symbol of male potency and virility, and for which the female body is a mere carrier in this phallocentric logic. Women are simply host bodies, as conceptualized by one Republican leader. The fetus embodies sanctified male seed, and women must make sacrifices to provide the receptacle and nurturing medium for this seed. The male-given sacred seed must not be destroyed by woman, i.e., male potency and sacrality must not be denied. This may also be why vasectomies are disregarded as an important and effective method of birth control, and why condoms are refused by many men, though they would decrease abortion need. The seed must remain unimpeded. These parallel socio-political stances, anti-abortion with regard to reproduction, and pro-gun ownership and anti-gun control, abortion as an abomination and gun rights as unassailable, or how the fetus and gun, or the seed and the bullet, are cathected and unconsciously symbolized, are manifestations of male anxieties about creation, destruction, and vulnerability. Male affiliation with the power of God is upheld through their powers over birth and death. As God is the creator of the world, so too are men. Men beget and engender through the seed and are creator of the child, as God is of the world. This symbolically aligns men with the divine. Men seek the power of God through affirmation of their role in creation and destruction, which allows them to believe they approach omnipotence and therefore the ultimate invulnerability. The anthropologist Carol Delaney offers what she calls a monogenetic theory of procreation that she infers in the Bible, a principle of creation that comes from only one source, the male, which makes this theory the human analog of divine monotheistic creation. The life-giving abilities attributed to men allied them with God. The theory is encapsulated by the word seed. Father and son are one through the seed. The denial of women as at least co-creators of life counter anxieties about reproductive difference and women's undeniably greater role in reproduction, which may threaten and inspire envy in men who wish to see their contribution as equal or greater than that of women, according to Colby writing on fetus envy. Females are relegated to the visibly feminine position through pregnancy, whereby men gain reassurance that they inhabit male bodies. Traditional gendered, social, and reproductive roles are also upheld. Men as impregnators and protectors and as bearers of gun and weapons. Women as nurturer and bearer of children. While the uterus must undergo paranoid regulation, the potent phallic gun must not. The right to impregnate and penetrate with the penis and gun must remain unfettered, it would seem, and women must not have divine powers to give and take life, to both be able to gestate life in the privacy of their bodies and terminate gestational life-forming processes at will. Only the fetus, above all, is to be protected and is granted the sanctity of life. Not living post-birth children, women, Black and brown life, LGBTQ life, the life of all American citizens who are potential victims of gun violence, incarcerated individuals, soldiers at war, civilian deaths due to American foreign policy and warfare, animal life, or the life of the planet, all harmed by American policy. The American craving for authoritarianism is evident in its electing of strongman politicians on the one hand and abortion bans and gun ownership on the other. Totalitarian control over the life-giving uterus and through the life-taking gun are undergirded by male fears regarding the engendering powerful feminine. Anxieties around female desire and sexuality, agency and autonomy, masculine potency, reproductive difference, male subjugation and obsolescence, and loss of male hierarchical power and privilege due to sociocultural transformation, especially white male extinction anxieties, lead to both women's freedom to choose abortion and gun control being experienced as not only terrifying, emasculating, but also annihilating. Gun manufacturers capitalize on these anxieties. There is the BRO line of semi-automatic AR-15 style guns with names like BRO Tyrant and BRO Predator. And gun ads carrying taglines such as, "Considering your man card reissued," for another semi-automatic rifle, the Bushmaster. The Bushmaster man card declares and confirms that you are a man's man, the last of a dying breed, with all the rights and privileges duly afforded. In a world of rapidly depleting testosterone, the Bushmaster man card declares and confirms that you are a man's man. There is also the NRA's Refuse to Be a Victim program. The messages are clear: manly weapons for manly men. I end with a quote from Gary Willis's 2012 essay on the Old Testament Canaanite god Moloch, to whom sacrifices of living children were made. Referring to the Sandy Hook massacre, he says, "It was the sacrifice we as a culture made and continually make to our demonic god. We guarantee that crazed man after crazed man will have a flood of killing power readily supplied him. We have to make that offering out of devotion to our Moloch, our god. The gun is our Moloch. We sacrifice children to him daily. It is an object of reverence. Its power to do good is matched by its incapacity to do wrong. It cannot kill. Warding the god is what kills. If it seems to kill, that is only because the god's bottomless appetite for death has not been adequately fed." The answer to problems caused by guns is more guns, millions of guns, guns everywhere, carried openly, carried secretly, in bars, in churches, in offices, in government buildings. Only the lack of guns can be a curse, not their beneficent omnipresence. Adoration of Moloch permeates the country, imposing a hushed silence as he works his will. Molochism is the one religion that can never be separated from the state. The state itself bows down to Moloch and protects the sacrifices made to him. So let us celebrate the falling bodies and rising statues as a demonstration of our fealty, our bondage to the great God. Thank you.
Katie, I just want to say, I'm really glad you're here, and Komal's paper in her language and her expressiveness and her passion is so evocative and powerful. And I'm sorry she couldn't be here with us, but you did a great job of being her voice just now. And I also want to say that my work is very, very parallel to what Komal's paper is about. Before I start reading mine, I just want to say that apparently, from what I've been reading, the NRA was intimately entwined with the German-American Bund, which you just saw at Madison Square Garden. And the German-American Bund was being funded by Nazi fascist Germany. So this analysis that you just gave us is so ever present, and it's so the sense of a covert, explicit movement to have, which Rachel Maddow, by the way, also looks at in her book Prequel and in her series Ultra, that there is an explicit effort to bring the Nazi German government to the US. And if you want to read that, it's very powerful, but we still have the NRA promulgating all these guns, which are killing our children at the same time that women are conceived of as murderers if they want to have an abortion. So in some ways, what I'm going to be saying will overlap, and in some ways it will go in different directions. So we just watched A Night at the Garden. In the USA, it now feels like 1930s Germany. History is repeating itself. Books are banned. Neo-fascists are exhilarated by hatred, by QAnon, by Fox, by the prospect of violence towards anyone who is not a white Christian nationalists. Black people, people of color, LGBTQ people, feminists, Jews, Muslims, judges, prosecutors, librarians, law clerks, election workers, anyone who's teaching gender diversity or racial history. Roe was overturned, a national ban on abortion seems imminent, and contraception is even at risk. As Komal was just describing, and Gentile frames this, fetal cells are elevated as persons while women's personhood is being eviscerated. Women are under surveillance, a body subject to theocratic law. Jesus is written on the barrel of a gun. The Proud Boys shut drag shows, and red states want to arrest pregnant women crossing into blue states. After all, a coven of evil must be arranging that transit. Your mother, your sister, even your Uber driver, Texas, can bust them too. And the Texas Supreme Court just decided to let pregnant women die in the emergency room if the doctor decides there is no life-saving abortion available to you. Some of this fascist turn is new, but mostly not. Paxton, in his book Anatomy of Fascism, considers the KKK of the 1880s as the first fascist prototype. And it's also the case that Nazi Germany borrowed on our race laws, the mechanisms of the KKK, and on our extinction of our indigenous peoples to formulate its own program. So there's always been this intercourse going on between American forms of totalitarianism and Mussolini and Germany. And also, Rachel Maddow and Spector have argued that there's always been a living core of fascism in this country. This living core is characterized by eroticized sadism, gender and racial persecution, and the sanctification of divine violence. In his study of the Argentine junta, Graciano describes this living core of fascism as, quote, a nexus of religious, sexual, and violent impulses, in which there is a move, quote, to repress human sexuality and then divert its insistent resurgence into religious violence. In the United States, this authoritarian nexus descends from a colonial era in which natural, quote, or carnal man was seen as inherently evil. God's wrathful hand would only be stayed for those who were born again into total submission to a Christian God. In 1741, Edwards writes his famous sermon, Sinner in the Hands of an Angry God. For the unconverted, he writes, quote, there is laid in the very nature of carnal men a foundation for the torments of hell. Natural men are held in the hands of God over the pit of hell. They have deserved the fiery pit. The devil is awaiting them. Hell is gaping for them. The flames gather and flash about them. After 1676, as slavery became raced as black, carnal man became the black body, the homosexual, the wanton woman. Writing godliness onto dominance and submission, writing Jesus onto guns and pointing that guns at othered bodies, white Christian nationalism became the anointed agent of God's vengeance. And we can see it now in its building fever. Watching A Night at the Garden, we witnessed this authoritarian nexus of race, gender, and divine violence. We saw the same eroticized fervor and hate and its grandiose phallic weeness that fuels MAGA and that the crowds cheered when they cheered Hitler and Mussolini. If we had the time, we might discover this nexus within every form of American totalitarianism: colonial indentured servitude, African-American slavery, the Trail of Tears, Jim Crow, America First, the KKK, the German-American Bund that we just saw, and the Chinese Exclusion Act. I agree with psychoanalyst Barrett, who says that, quote, we must consider the way in which authoritarianism and idealizations of the leader and tempestuous antagonism towards those who are not aligned with the group ethos, that is, the other, are all fueled by the conversion of libidinal energies that are both suppressed and repressed within the individual. It is surely a conversion of erotic energy that fuels those cardinal virtues of fascistic attitudes and activities: duty, honor, and loyalty. So you can feel this fever, this erotic arousal that's both homoerotic and repressed and turned into violence towards the other if you watch any Trump rally. Fascistic movements seem characterized by the gender obsession disorder that Ruti once diagnosed in America, a persecutory insistence on male dominance and rigid traditional gender norms. MAGA's assault on transgender, homosexuality, drag, and women's rights, these fixations are not incidental to the neo-fascist turn. They are a feature, not a bug. As both Wieland and Ben-Ghiat suggest, fascism seems rooted in a dread of masculine undoing, and this is what Kamal's paper was all about. and a compensatory idealization of phallic dominance, power, and violence. All of this comes together in MAGA, and I think Komal did a beautiful job of synthesizing this dread with the idealization of the gun. To defeat the neo-fascist turn, we need to address the psychosocial economics of this masculine anxiety that Komal was just writing about. But insofar as the social psychoanalytic lens focuses exclusively on phallic anxiety, we can actually reproduce the problem that we're trying to eliminate. Maleness, the penis, the phallus as metaphor, all of this remains at the center of our analytic discourse on fascism until we heard Kamal's paper. The split-off, objectified vagina remains at the margins of what is really supposed to be a man-to-man struggle. Fascism always seems to require a vanished, denied, submissive vagina to confirm and valorize its phallic prowess. We need to restore a visible, present, and subjective vagina in the discourse of about fascist structures. In psychoanalysis and in our social approach, a better form of resistance would be the restoration of a subjective vagina at the center of our discourse about fascism. Of course, there is a risk to taking this position that foregrounding the vagina and decentering the penis only flips over the gender obsessive disorder and might contribute to the same, although flipped over, gender polarities. And so I don't know if what I'm trying to do in this paper, it's a work in progress, is try to think about what happens if we try to foreground the vagina in a way as Komal has done, and could that take us away from the kind of gender binary rigidity and oppression that's at the heart of fascism? Let's try decentering the penis and see if we can restore a subjective vagina to this discourse. In beginning this move, I want to reach back to Karen Horney, who people don't pay much attention to anymore, but who first flipped the script in psychoanalysis about gender politics. In her work, the vagina became a salient body metaphor in sexual politics. And for Horney, sexual politics were not a simple intrapsychic matter or even an interpersonal matter. They were a social problem. She illuminated men's dread and envy of women and the defensive objectification, idealization, and denigration of women. As part of this defense, she argued, the man may also, quote, withdraw his libido from her to concentrate it on himself and his genital. This restores his masculine self-respect by reactively strengthening his phallic narcissism. The female genital no longer exists for him. The underdiscovered vagina is a denied vagina. Now, I do want to acknowledge the problem with some of this old literature was, her theory was constructed in a purely heterosexual vision. However, it's a really, really useful way to think about restoring the vagina as metaphor, as body genital and as metaphor in how we see sexual politics writ large in the political arena. If we follow Horney, the dread of woman becomes central to understanding psychic, social, and interpersonal life. We can see the vanished vagina hovering over male contest. Encounters with this vanished denied vagina can open up a window into female subjectification and perhaps also into all the other embodiments and sexualities that are not regulated by the patriarchy and that would threaten the phallic narcissism that underpins fascist movements. From this perspective, the MAGA persecution of transgender becomes even more legible. I mean, it's stunning. How many transgender people are there in the United States? And the entire right wing is completely obsessed with transgender people and the evil that they're doing to their children. From this perspective, as both Charlap and Ruti suggests, patriarchy could conceivably disintegrate if a biological man not only can relinquish his phallic privilege in order to become a female, but actually wants to relinquish that phallic privilege to become female. And if a biological female can become phallic with just hormones and surgery. Now it's the penis that can be easily vanished or borrowed, and there is the threat of man becoming woman. There is gay sex and gay marriage and men who like being bottoms. Of course, the Proud Boys are attacking drag story hour. In every far-right iteration, women are prisoners, as Comel has said, to sanctified maternal mythologies, the edict to stay home and make the babies who will become the warriors and the laborers of the state. If we are not domesticated, we are sirens, we are Delilah, we are Medusa, and our gaze threatens to turn real men to stone. Our passions and ambitions are seen as murderous, as Comel put it. We are like Medea. We want birth control. And the alt-right seems to actually think women would abort their babies 2 days before the birth, which is really a portrait of woman as murderous. Patriarchy always seems to be at risk from our perverse, unregulated couplings, from lesbians, bisexual, biracial, and trans women, from all those Black and brown women supposedly causing white genocide and endangering white supremacy with their mongrel babies. Ask the incels. Feminists should be raped. If you don't know what an incel is, I'm very happy for you. An incel is someone who's a man who's involuntarily celibate because he feels rejected by women. And this is, these men meet each other online or filtered into alt-right social media, and they argue for feminists being raped and so forth. Ask the alt-right, only white women should merit paternalistic protections from rape. Those protections are just incendiary racist propaganda and pretense. I don't have much sympathy for alt-right women, but I hardly think their bodies are being treated with tender respect by their alt-right men. It is really just a question in these movements of which men are permitted to control, rape, and batter which women. The more authoritarian the world gets, the more our bodies are regulated and violated. Women can be forced to birth babies conceived in rape and incest, and that threaten the life of the mother. Simultaneously, though, women are condemned as the not mother, as not entitled to mother. In totalitarian structures all over the world, maternal hearts are being broken. As Comel mentioned, in the US, Indigenous women and immigrant women are forcibly sterilized. Children have been forcibly removed from Indigenous mothers, stolen in the Magdalene laundries, sold in African-American slavery, stolen by the Argentine junta, separated from their asylum-seeking mothers at the US-Mexico border. Even as good motherhood is idealized by the alt-right as the singular role of woman. In these systems, agentic female lust seems marked as unholy. This lust is usually projected onto the other mother. In the totalitarian imaginary, this wanton other mother is gestating, as you know, the alt-right here is constantly talking about, is gestating invading hordes, criminals, and the Great Replacement. The destruction of her maternal bond is divine Christian retribution, the salvation of white supremacy. Operating through this splitting and projection, totalitarian systems sacralize the submissive mother who wants babies, not sex. She is a married heterosexual imago from the dominant race, class, and/or religion. During totalitarian turns, women's sexual freedom seems to be at the core of a malignant imaginary, seen as a causal factor in the dissolution of the state. This paranoid phantasm does contain an element of truth, sexual freedom and non-normative gender. These are ways of writing question authority onto our embodiment. Erotic departures and gender fluidity, these resist conformity and obedience and are forms of cultural critique. Abortion rights, homosexuality, transgender, and drag, the alt-right might be onto something for once. Maybe these embodiments really are a revolt against the state. Writing The Mass Psychology of Fascism during the rise of Nazism, Reich focused on the sexual repression of women in totalitarian structures. Employing a Marxist Freudian lens, Reich analyzed Mein Kampf and the social historical context of World War, the interwar period between World War I and World War II Germany. In Reich's view, the patriarchal family is the essential building block of the capitalist authoritarian state. This family indoctrinates obedience and submission through moralism and sexual and economic constraints. For Reich, totalitarian is, and here I quote, more than anything else, it is a fear of sexual freedom, conceived of as sexual chaos and sexual dissipation in the mind of the reactionary thinker. In this interplay between economic and structural factors, it is the authoritarian family that represents the foremost and most essential source of reproduction of every form of reactionary thinking. It is a factory where reactionary ideology and reactionary structures are produced. Hence, the quote, safeguarding of the family, unquote, that is of the authoritarian and large family, is the first cultural precept of every reactionary policy. This is what is essentially concealed behind the phrase, quote, safeguarding of the state, culture, and civilization, unquote. It's astounding to read Reich. Again, he is very, very embedded, not exclusively, but largely in a heterosexual portrait of women's sexuality, although he certainly recognizes same-sex love. But it's astounding to read his analysis in terms of what we're witnessing today. Reich emphasizes the centrality of female eros to this project, that is the project of fascism. To achieve and stabilize capitalism, women's sexuality had to be repressed. Women could then be conscripted into unpaid domestic labor, and unthinking, she would produce the next laborers and the next conscripts for war. He writes that in these neo-fascist capitalist systems, quote, and it really is uncanny listening to this and listening to the alt-right, quote, the wife must not figure as a sexual being, but solely as a childbearer. Essentially, the idealization and deification of motherhood, which is so flagrantly at variance with the brutality with which mothers of the toiling masses are actually treated, serve as a means of preventing women from gaining their own sexual consciousness and of preventing sexual anxiety and sexual guilt feelings from losing their hold over women. He writes, sexually awakened women, affirmed and recognized as such, would mean the complete collapse of the authoritarian ideology, unquote. Now, I'm not willing to go that far. I think that's an overstatement, of course. But there's something that he's getting at about the foundation and the foundation of these authoritarian structures and the servitude in which women's bodies are conscripted that holds together the entire edifice. In Reich's view, the awakening of autonomous female sexuality would destabilize capital, undermine totalitarian structures, because women would seek unregulated sex for their own pleasure, and reproduction of babies would be reduced, probably. Pursuing her own desires, given access to birth control and abortion, she can think critically about her position. She's not always bearing children and worrying about how to feed and clothe and give them a bath. She might desire a woman. She might seek abortion. Her body is no longer serving the authoritarian patriarchal state, although it's certainly an overstatement, and he omits most other forms of what we would call, what the alt-right refers to as deviant sexuality that would subvert patriarchy, like trans. Reich does offer an excellent description of the neo-Nazi turn in contemporary politics. In his view, when capitalist systems like ours are plunged into states of political upheaval and cultural conflict, quote, the conflict between sexuality and compulsive morality will of necessity reach its peak, unquote, at which point you see the kind of hysteria about sexual repression that we're seeing now. This violent deterioration of neoliberalism, which is what's happening in our country, becomes inflected with arousal, hate, and unreason. Erotic paranoia escalates. Ask Trump. He came down those steps to declare himself running for president in 2016, saying that Mexican rapists are invading America. Ask QAnon. Supposedly, Hillary Clinton ran a vast network of pedophilia out of a pizza parlor in Florida, while Epstein got a pass and got rich running a real pedophile ring for powerful men. In the shift from flawed democracy, which is what we've always had in this country, to neo-fascism, what Graziano calls the law of divine violence is activated. The virgin horse split intensifies. Male sadism becomes considered purification. Quote, pure women are enlisted to police wanton women, and all, quote, deviant forms of embodiment become persecuted. Analyzing Mein Kampf, Reich traced the same violent claims to family values that we hear in Russia, Hungary, and in MAGA. To resist fascism, we need solidarity across race, ethnicity, class, and sexual and gender diversity. And it's very hard to achieve that alliance without breaking down. I rage at white women who voted for Trump, who police, betray, and sacrifice their sisters, particularly Ginny Thomas and Amy Coney Barrett. There was Gina Haskell, a former director of the CIA who ran a Black site in Thailand. How do we think about these women? Well, to me, my visceral reaction is, how dare they take the name of a woman? Now I realize that the Black and brown woman, I may be that betrayer, a white feminist, presumptuous, insular, and blind, an agent of their racial and class oppression. So what I critique, I've not escaped. In 1981, Audre Lorde called out white feminists saying, quote, "What woman here is so enamored of her own oppression that she cannot see her heel print on another woman's face," unquote. So that we need to look at how we oppress each other. I used to think that regardless of all of our political and cultural differences, that if we had cis vaginas to link us, there would be some bedrock solidarity between women. Then along came Sarah Palin, and I had to create a whole new category for myself. It was a category I called strange vaginas. It was a kind of cis vagina we that could not be an us because there was really no solidarity. Now I know that having a vagina, a cis vagina, does not make you a woman or a sister. I have more in common with a trans sister without a cis vagina than I do with Amy Coney Barrett, who took Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat on the United States Supreme Court. Apparently, Barrett has a cis vagina, but she appears to have birthed most of those children. I think one is adopted. Well, she may have a vagina, but to me, she doesn't seem to be one. Raised in a Catholic cult, she is the neo-fascist agent of American theocracy. She has arrived. She's the anointed mother, and she has borrowed phallic powers. She's a big dick on the Supreme Court. She's happy to take away our reproductive rights. She managed a career in all of those children. Why can't you? She was a fundamentalist good girl who let the man lead, and he led her to the Supreme Court. What's your problem with that? So who and what is a sister? She, her, and hers. We are endlessly inventive through our embodiment at eluding the patriarchy, and the patriarchy seems endlessly inventive at diluting, dividing, and mutually antagonizing us and resurrecting our fascist structures. Meanwhile, the patriarchy accrues capital and power, and it keeps committing atrocities. It seems that in every authoritarian regime of fascism, state terror, racism, or genocide, this heteronormative, homophobic, virgin horse split seems particularly lit up and sorted according to classed and racialized categories of us and them. As I've suggested, this is not incidental to racist fascist regimes. As Saidiya Hartman, Cornel West, Bell Hooks, Jung Brule, and others demonstrate in their studies of African-American slavery and our subsequent racialized capitalism, these structures are foundational to these regimes, to the actual accrual of wealth and the exploitation of labor. And here I'm going to touch again on what Komal mentioned in her paper. In African-American slavery, the rape of female slaves was an instrument of terror and an instrument of capital. Masters no longer had to purchase new slaves, they simply raped them into existence. As Saidiya Hartman points out, this was a rape that was never inscribed as rape in the white narrative because the female slave was considered hot, bestial, and ever ready for sex. In the white narrative, she was considered subhuman, a slut, and her children were sold. She was the other mother who was not entitled to mother. In contrast, the white narrative invented the, quote, pure white desexualized mother who would birth the next slave masters. The white Christian mother was supposedly delicate and pure, and her vagina vanished. But repressed erotica always backs up on us, something that every psychoanalyst knows. The white mistress's vagina just wouldn't stay vanished. If she desired the forbidden black man instead of her white husband, the whole slave economy would crack up. In what West refers to as the psychosexual logic of racism and slavery, white men wrote their own repressed desires and fear of castration onto black male slaves, portraying them as having larger penises and superior erotic power. Imagining and dreading a lost contest to the black man's superior erotic power, the white master seems to have unconsciously feared, or consciously, that his pure white woman might actually lust for the superior tumescence of black men. In this fantasy, the vanished pure white vagina would become a castrating vagina, vagina dentatus, a signifier of the white man's lost power. Unless this consenting intercourse was rewritten in the white narrative as rape, an entire psychosocial economic system would have come undone, no matter how many black female slaves the white masters violated. Slave masters required an antidote to their projective, paranoid, erotic menace. And what was their solution? The literal and symbolic castration of black men, and a mythic narrative in which white violence now successfully masquerades in the alt-right as the noble protector of desexualized white women. Once the lust and autonomous subjectivity of the white woman married to the slave master was neutralized by the narrative, white women's desire is rewritten throughout our entire history as black male violence. Her vanished vagina is merely submitting to the white man's penetration, reproducing slave masters and white capital. Saidiya Hartman refers to this as an erotics of terror that was foundational to slavery. What white people are just discovering for themselves in the era of Trump, and discovering if they read things like Rachel Maddow's book Prequel, to realize that this has been with us in various epochs for a long time. People of color have known for centuries that fascism has always been essential to what the American Democratic Project. After all, the American Democratic Project was never a democracy. It began with only giving the vote to white men who possessed land. And then gradually it became white men who didn't possess land when the white narrative started to dread the idea that white laborers might identify with black laborers and black slaves. And so they were given the vote and the gun. I just want to say that Dusing, there's a very interesting book, edited book that just came out called Fascism in America. It's an edited book. And there's a great piece in there by someone named Dusing, who notes that Black Americans were the earliest, most vocal anti-fascist activists, well before any other voices were raised about Mussolini and Hitler. In 1936, Langston Hughes testified before Congress, quote, "Fascism is a new," referring to the building of the Nazi Party and Mussolini's movement, "Fascism is a new name for that kind of terror the Negro has always faced in America," unquote. So what we know, really, if we really think about it, is what we're seeing writ large and terrorizing us in the Trump movement, which could become, I think, full-blown fascism in this country if he gets elected, are tropes and that have recurrently described our entire American history, hidden within pockets that reside alongside the granting of white democracy, and written out of our favorite American myths about ourselves. And they've been there forever. And the tropes and the Christian nationalist tropes about sexuality, about the devil residing in any form of sexuality and gender that does not conform to a married woman who's submissive to her male husband. This has been present throughout our history. Throughout our history, white Christian nationalism has infused all of our totalitarian iterations: indentured servitude, chattel slavery, convict labor, manifest destiny, racial capitalism, the extrajudicial killings of Black and brown people, the extermination of Native peoples, the exclusion of immigrants, the wholesale spying and vigilantism during the Wilson administration. By the way, there's another book called American Midnight. It's about the Wilson administration prior to our entry into World War I and throughout World War I and right afterwards, that describes very much what Trump is planning to do. It's already been done. The persecution of homosexuality, American First, the German-American Bund, the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II, and the Chinese Exclusion Act. All of these have been characterized by white Christian nationalism and have used those narratives to legitimize themselves. Now, white Christian nationalism is corrupting the law, fomenting racism and anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and homophobia, writing Jesus onto the guns that are killing our children. We need to get together and find the resistance that resides in all of our bodies. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Grand and Dr. Janess, for presenting those wonderful papers. For participants, if you can write your questions in the Q&A, I can read them to our presenters here concerning their papers, and we can have some discussion. As those are filtering in, I'll start with a question here for both of you to see who wants to take it up. I'm curious, you both talked about the ways that the anxieties around whiteness, and particularly in the intersection with whiteness and masculinity, are connected to a number of these, deeply connected to a number of these projections and violent tendencies. I'm wondering if you can speak to how you see this coming up in analysis. Like, how does it tend to show itself when you're working with white men, and also how you work with that in the transference as relational analysts. Thank you.
Katie, do you want to speak to that? Because you've been thinking about these issues, particularly in the clinical setting, I think.
Sure, happy to start us off a little bit. One thing that I appreciated in Cole's paper was just speaking about the relatively diminished kind of socioeconomic situation of white men and the kind of humiliation that can get kicked up as a result of that. And so I feel like I happen to work with a lot of phallic narcissism in my practice, if we might call it that. And often there is this overcompensatory sort of need for control and strength to speak to the parts of them that feel so out of control and diminished. And so what is interesting also, to connect back to the gender theme of this talk, is that I often find a fantasy of being both genders, of being with both genders and being both genders. And I think we saw that today, where there's a fantasy of subsuming feminine procreativity within the male. And so there's almost a sort of, again, overcompensatory, patriarchal brittleness that covers over that wish to be all things at the same time. I could go on and on about phallic narcissism, but let Sue get a word in.
We'll do that. We'll have another talk. So one thing that I just want to say is also borrowing on what you're saying. I've done a lot of couples therapy, sometimes with heterosexual couples, where the man has a real rage problem and is very aggressive and very dominating, and it's hard to make space in the room for that, for it in a heterosexual context, for the woman's voice. And she's often figured as the frightened member in the room. I have to get very tough to get them that they can't do that in my room. But what you often find is that there's a kind of, talk about the man card, which I thought it was great in Cole's paper about the man card and the gun, is that a lot of white men not only feel fragile and inadequate about being male, but exhausted by having to hold up the man card. And for example, often in the standard traditional family of having to want to provide the money, of never to complain, of never to tell his wife or children how frightened he is and how exhausted he is and how he can't do it, and to be trapped in that. And that there's talk about what mentioning that to be both genders, right? That there's also a longing that can, in an individual analysis, can come up as homosexual wishes, which may be homoerotic desires. But sometimes what they also are expressing is a desire to just be passive. Can somebody else please take this burden of having to hold up the man card off of me? But that is such a humiliating wish that it also can reignite this cycle of domination and anger and aggression and insistence that the woman be submissive. So those are my thoughts about it clinically.
Mhm. I guess I can add just one tiny point, just because of you're interested in the clinical, what this looks like clinically, and I really find useful the clinical concept of identification with the aggressor and working with the dynamics of that, because I think, as Sue is saying, we often find people who are very identified with that powerful male role, the one who can humiliate others. But of course, there's also a part of the subject that is very rebellious against that, or more resistant, or longing to let go, as Sue was saying. And so keeping in mind both parts of the person. And honestly, the way I have compassion for these men when I work with them is because I'm going back in their stories and we're looking at times they were humiliated as men usually, or as potent, or as sexual. And those unfortunately cast a really long shadow on adult development. So
yeah, I think it's a wonderful way to put that. And it's easy if we look at Trump to see, and you read anything about like Mary Trump's book on his family, right? That the father, who was arrested at the KKK rally, who was always holding up this big man card, was excruciatingly humiliating and assaultive to his sons. And Trump did everything he could to avoid it. So, yeah. So do we have other questions coming in?
I haven't received any questions yet from the participants, but I'm wondering if we move from the psychic to the social here and these linkages that you're making. You talked about a potential sort of cultural therapeutic for resisting the fascistic impulses that are bubbling right now, would be to recenter the vagina in some way in public discourse. So I'm wondering if you could say more, Dr. Grant, about how that might work, and how our media might do that, or how counter protests might use that kind of discourse to disrupt or engage.
Yeah, thank you. You know, it's not easy because the language that we're primarily doing it in, which actually is being very effective since Roe was overturned. Not just women, a lot of men, but women are enraged. And that these mostly white men are determining what we're doing with our bodies. And I think that this has become such a force against fascism in this country. The other thing that I think has been a fantastic movement, where about centering the vagina in a constructive, way that creates a sense of female subjectivity and elicits greater empathy, is the emphasis on women who are having life-threatening pregnancies and what is happening. And these are, because it's so fascinating. They accommodate the gender obsession disorder and the proper heterosexual narrative because they are women who are married to men who want children and have children and have domestic lives. So they fit that category, right? And they are protesting. They are saying, but I could die from this pregnancy and you're telling me I can't get an abortion. And they're suing, I think in the state of Texas, they're suing in other states, and their stories have really taken off. And I think that, there are a lot of, conservative women. I mean, if you look at the data about the antagonism against this overturning of Roe v. Wade, it's an enormous majority of the country. And this is the way that you center the vagina in our political discourse right now. And it's most effective, not only with the groundswell of women who just are enraged that men are deciding for us, right? But that women who are having life-threatening pregnancies are fighting. And they're fighting while they're pregnant in the midst of their life-threatening pregnancy. It's quite stunning. And going public and letting their story, blast across the country. I think that this is a formidable shift in the way these stories are mobilizing resistance. So, yeah. I also, while we're waiting for questions, I just wanted to say, with regard to what Komal was talking about the gun, the history of the gun in colonial America was there was indentured servitude, in which the labor conditions were just as bad as they were for African laborers. And there was solidarity between African laborers, indigenous laborers, and European laborers. There was no racing at the time. When there was such hysteria, and indentured laborers were supposed to get a gun and a mule, I think, when they were released. When the labor became raced, what Black slaves, of course, and even Black freedmen could not have a gun. The indentured servants, who were now considered white, who had been abased and starved and tortured just the way the African laborers had been, were given a gun, and the gun was now pointed at those Black people, so who could not defend themselves, because there was such a terror that if they had a gun, they would come for their former white masters and join with the other laborers who were now raised. And this is, my feeling is that part of the sanctification of the gun is that this is like a forgotten history in the United States, that white people were slaves back in the colonial era. They were completely debased and humiliated, and then they were awarded a gun. And the gun was the signifier of freedom. And that's what they keep saying. It's our freedom. It's our right to freedom is to have a gun. And it was always in contrast to Black slaves who were not, and Black freedmen who were not permitted a gun. And I think that this has been going on forever, that it's the signifier of white men's freedom. And it doesn't matter how many children are getting killed. That to take this away sort of undoes this defense against the degradation and humiliation that they suffered early, and it's outside of cultural memory. So yeah, I think that's a big part of why we have this insane gun culture and why it's so, I'm out in Arizona right now. This is what was in Komal's paper. I'm out in Arizona. You can go to Walgreens practically and buy a gun in 15 minutes.
The racing of the gun rights question, the example of the Black Panthers carrying legally arms and the sort of panic that created, and the changing of attitudes toward gun laws in places where the Black Panthers were active is, I think, is a great example of that dichotomy.
Exactly.
I do.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yep. Oh, no problem. I do have a question here from the crowd, from Colleen H. She asks, of course, Trump is a primary figurehead for this movement, but how do you see this neo-fascist society continuing to build even if he is not reelected? It seems to me that if Biden is elected for a second term, there is still no way to stop the progress of neo-fascism as we move into the future. Do you see a way that this is turned around, given that it is so baked into American culture, regardless of the person who is chosen to be our next president?
Really good question. Katie, you want to start there?
There'll be another strong man. It will, it's just how it works.
Yeah, there will be. There will be another strong man. Although when you, like, if you read, one of the things that's interesting about reading this text, American Fascism, is that there, particularly in the 30s, there were something like over 100 neo-fascist fascist groups in the United States wanting to implant a Nazism here. And one of the articles I read, I can't remember, talks about the question of why they didn't ever take off. Why didn't, first of all, why didn't they unite? Why didn't it really become powerful? And of course, there are many, many reasons, but one argument is that you need a charismatic, demagogic leader. And Trump, we just in certain sense saw this with DeSantis. He's just as fascist, and he was scary because he was going to be even more competent. But he didn't have it. And so there is something about beheading the head of the snake, as they call it, and that movements, it's not that fascism is going to die or that the neo-Nazi movement is going to die, but it's been tremendously empowered by its affiliation with Trump. People who never were going to vote before, ever, are voting because it's Trump and he's their guy. So I don't think we need to be hopeless. I think that certainly the extreme right has taken over the Republican Party, and the money behind it is scary, but you really do need a certain kind of leader, and there really isn't anybody else right now who's got it the way Trump has it. So
Right, and that actually connects with some thoughts that came up for me while you were presenting, which is that when we're talking about this phallic narcissism, right? When we're getting really to the severe ends, we're talking something more like perversion. Like, and I say that purely in a non-moral way, but in the specific sense that there is a pretense that is masqueraded as truth. So a phrase, Sue, that you used earlier today was the covert / explicit fascist movement. And I feel like it exactly proceeds through a kind of gaslighting where, like in the video we saw, it looks like the title was a pro-American rally, but it's so clearly destructive to America, right? Or Trump, we're going to have the biggest lie, and that's how I'm going to mess with your mind. So I would agree that there's something so reality bending about Trump specifically that he is uniquely conducive to that demagogic figure.
yeah. Yeah, and I'm hoping that if we're ever done with Trump, that these movements won't become such mass movements so readily as they do behind Trump. He's really an exceptional figure. So yeah, I also am terrified. I mean, I'm still very frightened because this fascist alt-right movement has become so florid that I don't know how it gets put back in the box.
One of the reactions I was having in reading that question was thinking about, even in a post-Trump world, that one of the ways these same impulses continue to operate is perhaps like through the symbolic connection from a woman's body to Mother Earth, or to the sort of comportment or attitude towards the environment and the right to mine it and the right to drill oil out of it, no matter the cost to the bearer of life itself. I wonder if you both also see, I don't want to symbolically move away from the woman's body as a site of violence here, but see a connection to the earth as well.
Indigenous peoples consider the earth is mother. And it's life-giving, it's full of bounty, it's nurturing, it gives us life, it sustains life, right? So if you think about that, and you think about the way you were talking about it, the drilling, right?
Mhm.
It's like the rape of the mother, the rape of the earth. And this sense that, you know, one of the things that Eric Fromm talks about is a cult of death, like fascism is a cult of death, and that Mussolini wrote about, that it's like a cult of death, that you can keep raping the mother, you can keep stealing all the bounty and destroying the earth. And of course, very rich men just think that they're going to build a bunker, buy a new planet. But yeah, it's the metaphor is there, right?
Mm.
And in a sense, the movement to protect the environment, you could read as a vaginal metaphor in that sense.
Mm.
And the sort of phallic quality of conquering nature, which was such a source of pride, building things in a swamp, you know.
I'm getting the message here that we're going to be concluding shortly in the next few minutes. And I'm wondering if there's questions that we haven't asked yet, but that you hoped we might, or if there are lingering thoughts after hearing your paper read aloud or having interacted with the other paper that that you'd like to share with the group before we wrap up.
You know, my perennial question, my perennial challenge is that from the beginning of the colonial era when labor became raced, right? We were intentionally pitted against each other because it was so clear to the masters in the colonial era that if indigenous peoples and African laborers and European laborers and got together, which they were doing, that it would be the end of this system right at the beginning. And we have been split and fragmented and indoctrinated in such a way that for many legitimate intersectional reasons, it's very, very hard for us to all ally ourselves against this, what we're seeing. And I think that that's what we all have to work on now, is that we have to realize that even though we may have differences and you know, different positions and intersectionality and different sources of oppression and deprivation and who's at fault for it, and it's a very complicated system we're living in, we have to really, really see that our original enemy has used all of this to blind us and immobilize us so that we can't get together. And we're really, really, I mean, if there's any message I want to get out, we have to pull together and see that our fragmentation just serves our masters. It doesn't serve us. It keeps us paralyzed. So I remember when there was this amazing women's march right after Trump's inauguration, and it was so powerful, it was so huge, it was so passionate. And the leadership got divided around legitimate issues that were dividing people. But they couldn't resolve it in any way, and that all faded. So we need to get together and see who the, let's say, the biggest enemy is. Did you want to say something, Katie, before closing?
I really like that it's exactly, there are so many red herrings that distract from what is actually a clear, in a way, a clear fight or
Yeah.
antagonism.
Right. To save, you know, we can do lots of work after we get, you know, Biden in office. There's so much work to be done with everything that's wrong in our country and between different identities and everything. But we have to have a democratic structure in which to do that work. And without it, we're not going to be able to do it. So, yeah, and they're brilliant at these divisions. So I'd like to thank you and Allie and David Goodman and everybody for inviting us. And Komal and I will be doing a workshop on this topic in the beginning of March. So some of you who came today, I hope that we'll see you there and hear from you.
Thank you both so much for being here and for your engaging presentations today. We shared a link in the chat to the volume Fascism in America that you shared with the group. And for those that are doing CEs today, make sure you log into Canvas by January 31st and finish the survey in there to receive your certifications. Thank you again.
That comes by email? That we get that by email or what?
I think you have to log into the Canvas portal, but we can make sure that people have instructions to do that.
I
Yeah.
just wanted to clarify the link.
Mhm.
So Fascism in America is a volume. What you're going to see if you go in the link is about 6 or 8 of the authors are on a panel speaking about their work. So it's more accessible than reading the whole book. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you both so much. Pleasure meeting you, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.